Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute for those in the waiting room to join, and then we will get started with our Victim Rights Month opening event. All right, we'll go ahead and get started, and stragglers can just join us as they're able. So thank you all for joining us today for our kickoff of Victim Rights Month 2022. We are so thrilled to be joined by our 2022 Special Recognition Award recipient, Lovern Gordon, for her presentation of Despair to Equity. My name is Charlotte Hoff, and I am the Communications and Training Coordinator here at MOVA. I'm just going to go over some logistics quickly before passing it over to Lovern. First of all, this is a Zoom webinar, so you cannot be seen or heard as audience members, but you can see the presenters, ASL interpreters, and presentation. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the Zoom bar to ask them. Questions will be saved until the end of the presentation, and we will answer them all then. We do have ASL interpretation and cart captioning available during today's workshop. To see the closed captions, at the bottom of the Zoom bar, you can click on the up arrow next to closed caption and choose Show Subtitle. If you are having trouble seeing the ASL interpreters, closed captions, or have any other tech issues today, please use the chat function to message myself or my colleague, Brenna Chase, who's also helping with tech today, and we will be happy to assist you. If you do not see either of our names, you can message all panelists and we can help you from there. So now I'm going to introduce our fabulous presenter for this morning. Lovern Gordon is a two-time survivor of domestic violence and founder of the Love Life Now Foundation, an organization she founded to raise awareness around domestic violence and still leads today. She is known on a global level for her advocacy and support of domestic violence survivors and programs. We are so glad to have her with us to kick off Victim Rights Month and to learn some of her journey and discuss the barriers that victims face and how to overcome them. Thank you, Lovern, for joining us this morning. We're so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here and really appreciate you guys having me again. Thank you, Charlotte. Again, as Charlotte mentioned, this is Victims Rights Month, and I'm happy to be kicking it off with a presentation that is going to surround what I think is despair to equity and how do victims of abuse get from one end to the other. And so again, Lovern Gordon, I'm the president of Love Life Now Foundation and the author of a book called The Legacy He Left Me, a domestic violence awareness memoir that I wrote last year and is currently on tour with. Well, who is Love Life Now? Love Life Now, we eat, sleep, and breathe the issue of domestic violence awareness. We want this issue to be in the forefront as much as possible. We don't want it to jump off when something is, progressive in the news or in a newspaper. We want to keep this issue in the forefront as much as possible with prevention tactics, awareness around the issue in general, and how people can be a part of the solution. And this is us currently. We are a small but mighty team. We just added 2 board members, but they haven't officially joined yet. But Antonio is the lone man on the team. He does mentor and violence prevention work for the NBA and the NFL. Then there's myself, and there's Rose and Ebony, and they both are work at local banks. And what do we do? So we put on these awareness initiatives throughout the year to get people out and about talking about the issue, to involve community, build community around this issue, and we do so via educational workshops like this one. We also have in-person and virtual. Then we have a bedding drive that we host in October that asks folks to donate a new twin sheet and/or pillow, and we give those back to a DV agency in the area. Then we have our Get Safe Fund that asks folks to donate, but then those funds are helped to use to give to victims that are thinking about leaving the abuse or have recently left but need a leg up financially. And that can be a hotel for 2 to 3 nights. It can be toiletries, clothes, bedding, whatever that is needing them to, that is going to help them get from one end of their journey to another part of the next part. And then we have our White Ribbon Night Gala that just recently happened, and we engage men on the issue of abuse. Too often you have us as women advocating for this cause, but when men are involved, you know, it sends a different message to the men around them. 90% of the time, men are the perpetrators, so we have to involve them in the conversation so that we can get around this issue at some point. Then we have our DV awareness walk in heels. Heels are not mandatory coming up in the summer. We ask folks to put on their comfiest pair. It's not mandatory, as I said. We walk a mile in support of awareness. And last but not least, and really not our last, that's just sort of capping off what I'm explaining here, our homeless brown bag, where we go out and we meet the homeless where they're at in hopes to meet victims that are living on the streets and point them in the right direction for help. And so why am I doing this? Why are we doing this, right? Well, I am a surthriver. I like to call myself a surthriver. I'm just not surviving, I'm thriving at life. I am a child witness to the issue, as Charlotte mentioned, but I'm also a young adult survivor going through this issue as from 21 to 23 until I escaped. And so I'm going to sit here for a minute because, you know, you hear me talk about being a child witness, you hear me talk about being an adult survivor. But at that point, when I decided to escape this issue, it was because there were many barriers to me leaving. One for me, or I should say two for me, were fear and shame. The very last night that I got beat by my abuser, it was because it started from 9 o'clock the night before till about 9 o'clock the next morning. And it was the most severe beating that I had received, to the point where I knew that something was wrong with my body physically, that I had to get up and go get myself help. Well, in going to get myself help, I landed myself with every fear bone in my body, because leaving that morning where he was lying right next to me after he had finished this attack, it was because I was scared out of my mind. And it was whether or not he was going to catch me as I was leaving, whether or not he was going to follow me, which he did. When he saw that the cab took a left into the hospital, that's when he sped away. But going into that emergency room and asking for help, I first lied, because I was so full of shame, and I was carrying the shame of my abuser that had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with him. But I didn't know that. And what you don't know, you don't know. And so going into that ER, talking to these triage nurses and telling them that I fell in the shower felt okay to me, right? Rather than telling the truth. When the ER doctor came into the room and he asked, "Who did this to you?" I then fessed up, but not before hearing him say that I could get you help. And that word help in that moment meant so much to me. It meant that the police were going to get involved. It meant that my school was going to find out why I was on my way to flunk in my first year of college. I was going to Suffolk University at nights. It meant that my family was going to finally find out what was really happening to me. And so fear and shame bound me, right? And even though I ended up fessing up to the doctor and was told, you know, you could go home and, you know, be treated with medicine and ice for the hip contusion and upper torso contusions that I had received, along with a gash on the side of my head, I didn't understand that it was the most dangerous time for me. So being isolated from family and friends, I didn't believe, because of that, because I'd only been hearing from my abuser, nobody's going to love you like I love you. Nobody's going to, you know, understand our relationship like ours. For the 2 years that I was involved in this relationship, I was then now afraid at the point of when I would decided to leave, that my family wouldn't support me, right? So the lack of family support, whether it means that the victim believes that in their head, whether it means that family have said to victims over and over again, you should leave, I don't know why you stay, because they don't understand, that essentially puts them in a place where they don't have the support that would typically happen if family were there. As I mentioned, fear and shame, the idea of being blamed, being looked upon as you being the cause. For myself, I know succinctly that had watched my mother go through this as a child witness. And I believed at the time, before I even got into this relationship, that I had all the tools to recognize this really bad thing. I didn't know that it was domestic violence. I didn't have a term for it at the time, but I knew that it was bad. But I still was able to fall into this type of relationship, having an entry-level job in corporate America, going to school at nights, being on what I thought was a power level, like my dad, who owned all the power in our household, being the financial provider and the caretaker and having this power dynamic. I thought I had that, but here I was still in the same position. So believing that I would be blamed by family members and friends after knowing what my mother had went through kept me bound. Some victims, it's money, right? They don't have that leg up like the Get Safe Fund now provides for victims that come to us, right? They need, money to get out of the state because their abuser has said that they will find them anywhere that they live, right? Money to pay the car note because the abuser used to take care of all the financial expenses. And if they leave, they're going to be without a car. Their car is going to be repossessed. Somewhere to stay because they don't have shelter. They've been pointed in the right direction for help, but guess what? All the shelters are full. That means they and their babies could potentially be homeless. Legal counsel. So, the abuser has all the know-how, how to navigate the system, and they don't. It could be that they're immigrants that live here, and they've been told, come with me, come to America, we'll get married and everything will be okay. But they get here and there's no marriage and the abuse ensues. It could be that the abuser is telling them, look, if you leave or you try to talk to somebody, I'll get you deported. It could be that if you try to seek counsel, I will take the kids from you and I will win because I have money to fight you in court and you don't. Right? So all of these things keep victims bound in these types of relationships. And then at the core is awareness, right? And resources that if they don't know about it, can be detrimental or end up being detrimental to victims. So a lot of people, when they get to the end, don't know that domestic violence agencies exist. They don't know where help is and they don't know what help looks like. And not knowing can be daunting. When you do find out about help, it can be a myriad of things, just like I thought at the end, right? It meant so many things for me, and not understanding that systems were in place to help you. That you as advocates, those that are advocates on the call, were there to help them. Oftentimes when people hear, go to a domestic violence shelter or seek help at a domestic violence shelter or agency, they're often thinking that it's a big open room with beds with a bunch of people that they don't know. And when you leave what's normal to you, what's community to you, that is very scary, right? Especially if you have that myth in your head, because they don't know, right? And that's one of the reasons why, as a foundation, we seek to promote domestic violence agencies, not just where we are, but throughout the state and nationwide, really globally. Wherever we visit, we try to highlight them because a lot of victims don't understand that they even exist. And when they hear about the resources, they're like, oh my gosh, had I known, I would have done this. But that's where you come in, right? For me, I didn't have someone in the hospital that further explained to me what help was, right? When I sat there and I was diagnosed with, again, as I mentioned, contusions and a head injury, it was absolutely daunting. So again, what part do you play as victims? As advocates or people that are in a position to help victims understand, first of all, that you exist, and that when they seek to come to you, to have them understand that it is the most dangerous time for them, but in a loving way, because that's what it is, right? Leaving is the most dangerous time. And a lot of the times victims don't understand that. Me then leaving that hospital to go back to my apartment that day after I was diagnosed with these injuries was, I thought in my mind, the best thing that I was doing. I wasn't going to have any contact with him. I was going to, at the next time that he decided to call, was going to let him know that we were officially through. And not understanding that when I did tell him that 2 weeks later, that meant that he was going to fly off a handle, right? The idea of you leaving, right? Or the victim leaving and losing that level of power and control over their victims puts them in a headspin. And that's exactly what happened to me, right? And so when he heard over the phone that I was done and was through, he could not take that for an answer. Showed up at my apartment, and even though the locks had been changed on the main door downstairs, he waited for someone to slip past them, and he went through the door and ended up at my apartment door. And that turned into me finally calling the police. But in calling the police, it was because he then decided to flee. And when the police showed up, they said that he had cut the phone lines in the basement, and he was trying to use something like a crowbar to get in between the locks to gain entry to my apartment that day. And I believe wholeheartedly that if he had gotten in, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you, because I had dared, or I had even dreamed about thinking about leaving him, and he was not going to let that happen. Even though I had then said that that was it, and the police showed up, I still didn't give him up. I still didn't tell the police that, this is the person that did this to me. What I did say was that someone was trying to break into my apartment. For women of color, there's this additional barrier of not having that level of trust in police as typically everyone else would, right? For all the reasons that you've heard in the news over the years, racism, bias, fear of whoever they're calling the police on will get shot on contact, right? And I had that in my head and believed that, I didn't want to get him in trouble. I just wanted the abuse to stop. And a lot of the times when victims get to the end, that's all it is. They're still in love with their abuser, but they can't separate that love from their safety. And that's, again, where you come in. I finally, 2 weeks later, decided to get a prevention order, but not before being stalked. Once the police were called, he realized that he couldn't physically touch me. He couldn't physically come near me. And so he started stalking me to the tune where he would leave derogatory notes on my car that I would have to fish off every morning. And it was because I was looking over my shoulder every single day. And this went on for about a week until I decided, okay, I can't do this anymore, because I don't know how I'm supposed to living like this. I didn't know if he would be under the car. I didn't know if he would be in the back seat. I would have someone, the person whose car I was driving at the time, I would have them check the back seat of the car before I got in. I would have them check the trunk, because again, I don't know where he could have been. So at any given point, he could have been behind some bushes, maybe a block away, watching me fish these notes off the car. And that's when I finally decided to file a restraining order. When I finally went in to the courthouse, I did not have an advocate with me. This is 2001. And I didn't know what to expect throughout that process. And as I said, it was daunting. Walking into a courtroom for the first time at 23 years old was scary. And being told, you need to fill out this form, by the clerk at the courthouse, filling out the form, going through that process, having to then detail what had happened to me on the next, the affidavit portion, which is not, you cannot see here, but having to detail what had happened to me for the first time that other people were now going to see was insanely shameful. Okay, having to detail that this person had put hands on me, had beat me, had broken me down, the things that he was doing to keep control over me and keep fear in me. It was daunting. I had nobody to walk me through about what should be said, how it should be said. I just knew that I needed to put what had happened to me pen to paper for them to understand how much in fear I was. And then to be told that I needed to come back 10 days later to get a final or a year-long restraining order at that time. I was scared because I was now being told by the clerk that this is a temporary order, but coming back, I would have to face my abuser in court. And that, again, one of the scariest times in my life, because I said to myself, What is he going to do? Is he going to fly off the handle in court? Is he going to lunge for me? Is he going to act up in court? Is he going to lie? And he sure enough did. But again, nobody there to explain that to me. And that was not a good time. But for any victim, as we point out here, the fear of not being believed when you go before a judge, or telling anybody, an advocate or a friend or a family member is crucial. That fear stays with you up until you decide to do it. The perception based on the way you're dressed when you walk into a courthouse. Some victims don't have access to the clothes that they all left behind. Some folks have a certain style and may be judged up, be biased. For victims of color, it's all of the above. Plus, as I mentioned, when you call or deciding not to call police or even go to the courts, is the lack of trust in police and the system. The stereotype of Black women that, when police show up, that they're strong, right? That, you don't look like the typical victim, right? You're yelling and you're screaming and you're angry and, you don't deserve the type of help. And again, that really goes to any victim. But again, that extra layer, I can't not point out. Undocumented immigrants, the fear of deportation. If you decide to call the police, you're believing in your heart of hearts that when they show up, you will get deported. And they don't understand that, right? They don't understand that what their abusers have been telling them are lies. And, it's upon you to help them dismantle that. Lack of interpreters in the courthouse. When victims enter the courthouse, I have been privy to some cases where I've had to accompany a victim because they reached out to us initially, and we accompany them to court because they feel comfortable with me being there. And I've seen that, they're scrambling for an interpreter because there's a lack of them in the courthouse. And so when they present their case, it's because they're looking, to others stupid, unfortunately, right? Because they can't, English isn't their first language. They can't, vividly portray the amount of fear and abuse that they've gone through, because again, there's that language barrier. For transgender victims, the bias on sex based on their sexuality, right? That initial bias, again, the way that they dress, the way that they look. Sometimes when they enter the courthouse, it's because that's where the shame and the blame starts. Oh, if you weren't, if you were just who you were supposed to be, then this wouldn't happen. Or they're laughing at the way that they dress, or the way that they look, as I mentioned. There's so many barriers that keep victims bound. And you have such an important role to play in that, in being supportive, in making sure that they understand that you are there to help, that seeing that your role is critically important, and understanding how much of a role that you have, right? So being trauma informed, considering all of the things that I just mentioned, and understanding that everybody's community that they come from or background is different. And it's not a one size fit all for everyone, right? So for people that, thrive on community, immigrants who only have sort of that circle that they dwell in for, when they leave their country and come here into the United States, understanding that that can be a part of the process of getting them from despair to equity, not shutting them out. If they have to go to shelter, understanding that, them leaving their mother who used to look after the child, or could communicate with their child when they're out to work, is important. Involving mom in the care, involving, the sister in the care. For women of color, understanding that they have a different way, or might have a different way of viewing things, and understanding why they won't necessarily take that next step. It can be because, again, fear of police, fear of the systems, and really helping to break that down for them. For transgender victims, getting, again, folks that understand the situation on staff and around you to understand why it might be different for them to move forward with getting help. Again, everybody has a different sense of why the next side looks scarier than for the next person, than the next person would take it. So, just understanding again that your role is important. Really avoiding re-victimization, right? It's so easy to sort of go that route when sort of the feeling of, and let me rephrase this. Some advocates, some of you, may have never experienced this issue, but you come to this work with a heart full of wanting to help, right? But really realizing and understanding from the jump that, again, certain things that are said could be put that person in the victimization process. I'm going to give a very broad example based on my own experience. Now, walking into that courthouse for the final hearing to get the 1-year restraining order, I sat on the stand to give my account in front of a whole slew of people that I did not know, a whole slew of people in the audience, and then the judge and the lawyer, and then him with the glaring eyes sitting across from me in the room. It was just as much as me getting the last beating, right? It was just as painful because here I was looking out into an audience that was looking back at me, and all I could think was, they don't believe me. He's a man, he's gonna get over. And this was after he had his chance to sort of speak and lie in front of the judge to try to make me look bad. And I remember saying to myself, okay, they're not going to give me the restraining order based on, because he sounded very much believable. And I, again, just believed that I wasn't going to get any justice. Again, not saying that this is you, but again, making sure that the words that are portrayed and the way that it's portrayed really comes together in hopes of helping victims feel whole, and knowing that you're going to continuously be there is critical. While doing the work, oh gosh. So since escaping the abuse, getting the restraining order, which finally kept him away, 10 years later, I decided to form Love Life Now Foundation and create this community of awareness. But in the beginning, I took on so many stories that said me too, because people were waiting for permission for me to speak up. And during that time, I remember just taking on so many folks' traumas and bringing it home with me and I didn't understand how I could separate what was being poured into me versus what I needed to keep separate. And it took me a long time, to the point where I was 5 years into doing the work and I started to get burnt out. Because I had said to myself, well, Lovern, you created this thing to create community and to get people out and about learning about the issue, but I hadn't banked on people then pouring into me what they had experienced as well to get to that next step of getting help. And it took a toll on me, again, to the point where I felt like I wanted to stop. I didn't stop, but I wanted to. And I remember coming home and I started having really bad nightmares again. Something that had happened to me during the abuse, when I was a child, when I became a young adult survivor, and then throughout the years until I got therapy. And these nightmares came back in the form of brutal attacks against victims in my dreams. And I remember, okay, so I got to get a hold on this. And so I started therapy again, but that wasn't before it started to seep into my daily life. Other people were beginning to experience what was happening to me too, based on my mood or my behavior. And I was taking it out on them. And it took me another 2 years to understand that I needed to set boundaries and really sort of separate what was happening at work versus what I brought home. So that meant setting time for myself. That meant cutting off work at a certain time, because what was happening was essentially people would call at any given point in time, because I said call at any given point in time. So morning till like 7 o'clock at night, I was getting calls about people looking for help. And I didn't understand that I needed to set a boundary of time to shut work off, and be done at a certain hour. And the issue of self-care became really prominent, fast and furious, because I said to myself, if I'm going to continue this work, there has to be something. There has to be some sort of give. And over the next few years, I started these things, practicing joyful movement. Gosh, I love to dance, y'all. And I don't know about you, that brings me joy. It brings me joy when I get up and I move. And doesn't necessarily have to be dancing. It could be exercising, right? As I said, setting boundaries around the hours of work and making sure you're stopping when you say stop, right? Not bringing the work home with you. Nourishing your body and mind, and that can be through the form of food. What you're putting in your body, you're going to get out. It can be what you're putting into it with TV, music, radio, whatever have you. Exploring your body, I always screw up this word, guys, neutrally. I always screw up this word, neutrality. I know you guys must be saying, help her, neutrality, right? And forest bathing. So this is a new one for me. And I just started doing this earlier this year. I went on a trip and learned about forest bathing. And what it essentially means is just immersing yourself in nature. If you go into a heavily wooded area, you take it in for all it is, the noises, the calmness, the sounds, the things that you find along the way that you stop and take a look at. It's amazing when you just stop and, you hear that term, smell the roses. My gosh, well, smell the forest, right? And just really take it for all it was, because I'm going to stop here for a quick second and say that for all the work that you pour in to what you're doing on a daily basis, again, it can take a toll on you. And I know it's just not myself. I can outwardly say that I know that there are other folks that go through this too. And these things I really like to spend some time on, because it's so important. And again, not all of these things are going to, be what works for you, right? You do what works for you. And so forest bathing, connecting with those that uplift you, as much as there's toxic energy that comes from the work, there's also great energy if you surround yourself with people that lift you up. Exploring triggers. So you may do this work and you may be a survivor like myself, and there may be things that really own in on getting you sort of back to that place where something might have happened to you. Again, you may not have never experienced this issue, but sometimes you're doing the work and these things may come up and you're like, why does this make me feel this way? Stop, make a note of that, jot it down in the journal, and really sort of own in on how to curb and not necessarily get rid of, because as survivors, as thrivers, I don't think we ever really get over this issue. I think we gain the tools over the years to manage them, to manage the triggers that come along with them, to put us in a different space when they do happen. Prioritizing sleep and rest. This is so important when doing the work. A lot of the times we're going, and we're helping the next survivor, and we're helping the next survivor, and we're trying to seek help with the next survivor, and we're not prioritizing ourselves. Again, setting boundaries between when work starts and until when work is done. And getting enough sleep, right? Shifting to self-compassion and kindness. Being gentle with yourself doing this work is so important. It really helps to help you understand that maybe you did not get that survivor the help that they needed. Maybe they did decline to help. Maybe there wasn't shelter space and you were hoping to get them placed today. Being gentle on yourself and understanding that you're doing as much as you can. Giving yourself some breathing room and space. Honoring your truth. And that can be whatever it is. Again, you're coming into this work as a survivor, or you're coming into this work not a survivor, or you know, that you're again doing the most and the best that you can, whatever that is in the space that you are. Disconnecting from social media, I think that goes along with prioritizing sleep and rest, to making sure that you are not putting, you know, because on social media can be a place that really gets you going at any given point in time. And you know, with the news stories that are happening, there's so many that pop up on our news feeds every single day. But then even within your same circle, when I talk about, you know, nourishing your body and mind, that goes along also with disconnecting from social media, because what you're putting in, if there's a whole bunch of toxicity on your timeline, that's what you're going to be going to bed with or starting the day with, and that's the last thing that you want. Breathing, mindfulness, and meditation. Again, this is not going to work for everybody. This is not for everybody. But again, at the very core, everybody breathes. Everybody takes breaths. And so in doing so, stop, take a minute and breathe. This morning, before I did this presentation, I just stopped for a minute and I took some deep breaths. And that does so much for our psyche. I mean, just stopping to breathe is something that we forget to do, as much as crazy as it sounds, because we're holding all this in and, you know, not recognizing that that can really affect your work and your mindset for the day. Mindfulness, being, again, cognizant of what you're thinking, the thoughts you're thinking, that also affects the work that we're doing every single day. Creating supportive environments. So again, if folks are, you know, around you don't support you, reevaluate, right? We tell our clients every day, if you know that this relationship is toxic, you need to cut it at the knees, right? And it's the same thing for you. Creating supportive environments, those that support you, keep them around you. Laughing, dancing, and singing. As I said, I'm a dancer. I love to dance. I also love to sing, not just in the shower. It's a thing for me to just, you know, just shout out loud things that make me feel good, and laughing, right? So again, maybe connecting that with social media and finding things and following pages that make you uplifted or keep you uplifted. These are the things that are going to really sort of own you in to, I'm sorry, I got to find my place here. Going to own you into okay, and so we're getting to the next step, the last part of the presentation. I had to get a minute to get that up there. I wanted to keep it short and sweet because we really wanted to, I'm sorry, that was not supposed to pop up right away, but I really wanted to own in on, you know, what our foundation is. Again, we're not just resources, but we have the Get Safe Fund that I would love for you guys to really recognize, because again, folks, sometimes when they get to the end, they need a leg up financially that we can potentially help with, not just hotels for overnight that while they're looking for shelter space, but also going into, you know, expenses that the abuser used to take care of, or some things that they left behind that they can't get out of. And so that can be anywhere from $1 up to $500. So if you ever come into that situation where a victim needs help, please reach out to us. You can call or text, they can call or text us, and you can also visit our website for more information on our initiatives. And that is the book that I mentioned earlier, The Legacy He Left Me. And now we are going to go into question and the answer portion. I wanted to really keep it succinct, so we had time for that. Charlotte, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Lovern, for sharing your story, for sharing some tips on how to best support survivors, especially when they're facing barriers following their victimization. So I would just encourage anyone in the audience, if you do have questions, please put them into the Q&A at the bottom, and we will start reading those out now. We do have one question, and it is about the Heal-a-thon that Love Life does. So is the Heal-a-thon happening this year virtually or in person, and what are the dates?
Whoever asked that question, you must have ESP, because that was our post this morning on social media. While welcoming 2 board members, we did say if you want to meet them in person, the Heal-a-thon is happening this year in person, and it's going to be on June 4th. So in person this year, finally, and we're super excited that it's happening again. So yes, thank you for that. And it's going to be at the same place, DW Field Park, out of Brockton. We're going to walk from DW Field Park all the way up to Signature Healthcare on Oak Street with all of our awareness signs. Men are joining us. They have joined us in the past, and they're going to join us again. So I'm super excited about that. And the men walk in heels as well. So that's something a sight to see. Them and their Mary Janes and their, their wedges, their wedge heels. It is a sight to see. So I'm so glad you asked that, and thank you.
Okay, that was the only question we had so far. I'll give it another minute in case any others come in. I don't know if you have any, it's okay or not, but if you have anything else to share or any other final thoughts.
Absolutely. I do want to say that every day we come into contact with folks that are looking for resources. And oftentimes it's either because this is the first stop on their journey, because they have a friend that knows about us, or they know we point folks in the right direction for help, or it's because they feel like the system has depleted them. They feel like the system has not shown up for them. And that is really disheartening, often every single time to hear, because it's either the courts, the police haven't listened to them or believed them, and it's frustrating for me to hear them think that they feel that way. And again, it's just reiterating your role, that when they finally get to you, how important it is, because you're possibly the person that's going to determine whether or not they return, whether or not they take the next step. And I can't impart on you how important it is to just show up and show out, because they're banking on you. That can often mean them returning to the abuser, or just deciding that this is where they're destined to be. And that we know that's not the case. Everybody deserves to be a survivor, to get to the other side where life is better. They're on the road to healing. As I mentioned, for me personally, I don't think I will ever heal from this issue. There are many things that pop up on a day-to-day basis, but you can absolutely be that person that helps them understand that, again, where they are is not where they're destined to be. So, really understanding and getting to the nitty-gritty of those barriers, understanding that there's so many different ones for many different groups of people. And again, one cookie cutter way of serving victims is not the only way. It's hard, y'all. It's hard. I mean, you could have never have told me that as a, working in corporate America at 21, going to Suffolk University at nights, that I would be beaten and hit and verbally abused and emotionally beat down, that I would be in this position. Stark contrast from my mom, who was uneducated, financially dependent on our father, and didn't have a say in anything that she did at all when we were growing up. I thought I was different, but yet here I was in the same position. So again, the people that come before you oftentimes have these stories. Get to the heart of those stories, get to understand the why, and not just, sort of throwing out what's been sort of taught to you in training. Go deeper is what I ask. Go deeper to understanding those barriers, to understand what their communities look like, to understanding to understanding, what their fears, what lies at the base of their fears, and how you can best serve them. Connect, work and connect with other advocates, other agencies, not working in silos. All of these things help to get people the best Some people might need their churches. Some people need their pastor, right? Because that's who they've confided in for so many years. Getting out there and understand, presenting what these, resources are, not just, within where you work, but outskirts, communities, churches, schools, to let folks know that you do exist. And these are the ways that you can help.
So we did get a few other questions as well, so I'll start going through those. The first is, do you have any special guidance or thoughts for younger or college student interns just starting out in this work?
Gosh, yeah, that's huge, because that's really sort of, if you're in that space, this is really the turning point about whether or not you're going to go forward with it, right? This is too much, or I love this work, right? I think if you start off with self-care in this work, right, regardless if you're an intern or not, that this is what is going to propel you to the next level and keep you grounded. So all of the things that I talked about in terms of showering yourself with self-care, even though you're an intern, is just really important. And then again, if you start off as an intern, trying to get to the nitty-gritty of what those barriers are for victims leaving, understanding what those look like, delving into it more, even on your off time when you're not, at the internship. There's just understanding communities, different communities, and how these things affect them. Transgender, the care for transgender victims will not look the same as immigrant victims. The care for immigrant victims are not going to look the same as women of color victims, right? If you start off there and couple that with self-care, I think that will sustain, that will help you be sustained, or continue to feel sustained in the work.
Self-care is so important. We can't emphasize that enough, especially in this field. So thank you. The next question is, can you give some examples of things that a provider has done or said that have made a difference in a victim of domestic violence feeling supported? So maybe some examples either that you've heard, and maybe also some things that didn't work as well. I think sometimes that's just as important.
Yeah, absolutely. So a few victims have come and said, the fact that you just listened. Okay. I think we discount how big listening is in this work, right? We're often ready to just give the help, right? I already heard 4 sentences from you, and I know you need to go to a DV shelter. Well, you didn't hear the rest of my story. You didn't listen. And sometimes people just want to vent. Oftentimes when we go out and we do the homeless brown bag, where our goal is to meet victims on the streets that have suffered abuse, they just want to be heard. And I can't tell you how many times we have folks that chat us up for like 10 minutes about where they were and where they were hoping to be, but this is where they ended up. And they never dreamed that they would be homeless, but here they are. And they just want you to hear them out. So listening is so important. And many people they don't take that for granted. Another one is, I believe you. Sounds simple enough. We're taught that in the beginning of this work. Telling them, but you cannot say it enough. You cannot tell a person that you believe them enough. I understand. I empathize with you. Not that I understand you, because you may not have walked the same walk that they did, but I empathize with you. I can't imagine being in your position, right? Making them feel that they're an individual. Their individual circumstances matter, right? So that's been awesome. And then on the flip side, it's this is what you need. Brunt, curt, doesn't help. No, it's not what I need. I'm telling you that I can't go to shelter because I'm fearful of what might happen to me. I may have had a prior shelter experience, and this is not going to work. So then saying to yourself, well, how do I better help this person? Again, also not taking into account their specific circumstance and sort of talking from your training, like a role book or a guidebook. Again, I think listening can play a really critical part in this role. And it has helped me over the years. I am not and I'm not saying this because I'm the best advocate. I just know, for me as a survivor, what I would have liked had I had an advocate with me, and try to give that back in the work that we do. Do we always do great? No, there's some people that come to us and after they, man, I wish you would have said this, or I wish you could have just pointed me. And you know, it wasn't until I went to this place that they told me about this, and you didn't. And you know, sometimes we don't always get it right. But again, really being conscious and mindful about the words and how you're saying them, and again, what you're taking in and how you're taking it in. I hope those help.
I think those definitely are helpful, and great to give like both sides what does and does not help when first meeting with a victim. So we sort of have two questions that tie into one another. So one was asked in the chat about shelter and where to go when shelters are full. And MOVA's Director of Victim Services, Jesse Aquino, provided the SafeLink hotline number in the chat, which is the statewide number for all shelters. And then we got another question just after that, asking for any advice on assistance for victims and survivors who are looking for housing assistance. Right now, it feels like there are wait lists upon wait lists. So I don't know if you have anything to add on housing and or shelter options.
Yeah, and so that just depends on where you are. When folks get to us, they are looking for oftentimes shelter. They want to get off the street, they want to leave their situation. And the first number that we give them is SafeLink. But oftentimes when they call, there is absolutely zero space across the state. And the advice is keep calling, right? Keep calling. That doesn't help someone's situation that's in dire straits. So as I mentioned earlier, the temporary Band-Aid that we have, and there's some agencies that also have, and again, we're not a domestic violence agency, we're strictly mostly focused on awareness and education around this issue. But when there are some agencies that we have worked with over the years that have that flexibility to, or have funding that they can help put up a victim in a hotel up for, you know, up to 2 to 3 nights or more. We also have that ability to put folks up for 2 to 3 nights, but again, that is a Band-Aid. And I know there's one DV agency, which is Family and Community Resources out of Brockton. They have, they do not have a shelter component, but they do have funding for HUD housing. And they've helped me just within the last 3 months place someone into housing with that HUD funding that they have. So again, I don't know how much more of it that they have, but I know that that's one resource that folks can lean in on. And again, it's Family and Community Resources, fcr-ma.org on the web. And the person that is that runs that is Pat Callagher.
Can you repeat that link again slower?
Absolutely. www.f as in Frank, C as in cat, R as in Robert, -ma. Thank you, Jesse, .org, which is also listed in the chat. And so that's one resource that I've relied heavily on. If, you know, for some person that, you know, maybe working or have access to a job and they don't necessarily want to go to shelter, but they have to escape the area that they're in. They have helped within the last 2 months. So that's the only resource that I'm aware of right now. And again, us for, you know, the Band-Aid fix, which is the 2 to 3 nights in a hotel that we can help with as well.
So the last question that we have, and if anyone does have any final questions, please do feel free to put them in the Q&A. We do have a few minutes that we could still answer a couple questions, but the final question we have actually is a good transition into my sort of closeout, and it's how and will the recording of this session be available afterwards for us to refer to others. So we have recorded this, and anyone who attended today will get an email with the link to this recording as well as the PDF of today's slides. So that should be coming a little later today to all the attendees. Well, we don't have any other questions, but thank you so much again, Lovern. This was just so full of information. It is always so great to hear from you and your wealth of knowledge. And yeah, thank you so much again. And thank you all for attending today. I hope you all have a great rest of the day. Brenna did just drop in the chat a few other resources just general resources for victim services, the Victim Bill of Rights, as well as a link to an evaluation for today. So that will also be included in the follow-up email. So if you don't mind taking a few minutes at some point in the next couple of days to fill that out as attendees, that would be great. And MOVA is hosting a whole bunch of other workshops throughout the month. Today was just the start, and what a great start it was. So if you want to attend other workshops throughout this month, we have them at least once a week, every week throughout the rest of the month. Please do register on MOVA's website, also in the chat just now. So without further ado, we'll give you back a few minutes of your day. And thank you so much again, Lovern. This was really great.
I appreciate you. Thank you to Jesse for those extra resources, and to Marie Gagnon. I did see your comment in the chat. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. And to everybody that joined this morning. This is absolutely, I can't tell you, as a survivor doing this work, it is completely cathartic for me to give back in this way and to share my story with you. So I appreciate you big time. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, you're getting so many thank yous in the chat, of course, because you're so incredible. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.